So this is going to be a small tutorial slash review for Catan oil spring scenario. It is not a scenario that's part of any other major expansion. And you can pick it up for under $10, I think, on Amazon. And what you see in front of you is what you get. You get a nice little, fairly comprehensive rule set, actually. And it even covers, and you get pieces enough to play up to 6 players. There's 2 variants, one for 3 to 4 and one for 5 to 6 players. And then you get all these pieces over here. You get oil tokens, you get victory points. I'm not sure if it comes with this many, but at least 8 or 10 of them you get. You get some oil springs tokens, some with numbers and some without. And then you get, these are called Metropolis tokens, and then a disaster track card with a marker that goes with it. I'll explain all of this. A champion of the environment token, I think this is called. So this, what you see here, is basically what the set is going to give you. I think it was $8.95 on Amazon, plus shipping, of course. So yeah, and the other reason why I wanted to do this video is because we have included 2 wonders for this scenario, for the oil spring scenario. And if you don't know what Wonders is, I will link to Catan World Wonders, which is a fan-made expansion for Catan, where we have made 2 expansions for that, called World Wonders Revisited and then World Wonders Reloaded, which we just released, where the wonders for this scenario is included. So I know not all of you are probably familiar with this. I know you can find reviews on this on YouTube or elsewhere, but since our wonders then directly related to it, I wanted to just include a little one here. So we're going to switch over to the game board, and then I will explain the rules with a few examples on there. All right, so here we have the game board. This is the way that the rules suggest you put up the board following the base game. You can combine this with many other scenarios. We have combined it with Seafarers, with Cities and Knights, and it works well. But it adds a little bit to the rules, not too much. It doesn't change or remove many rules, or any at all. So it shouldn't be too complicated to do this. Now, you can change or vary up the placements of the numbers and the tiles, but the rules say that the board becomes highly unpredictable. We usually do a random board, so for us it hasn't been any problem, but I wanted to show you what the rules are actually suggesting here. So here, a 3-player game, each player now has a city and a settlement. You start with 2 settlements, just like in a normal game. I just wanted to up it a little bit. So here you can see that we have 3 oil springs, here, here, and here. And the forest and the pasture here, you can obviously put any number on. The one that comes for the desert has a number already. There's also a 9 included, and if you play 5 to 6 players, then you would actually have a 4th oil spring on your game board. So the basic story is that oil as an extra resource has been found on Catan, and everybody's trying to get oil, and it yields a lot of rewards using oil, but it can also damage or pollute the environment. So that's sort of the environmentalist angle at this scenario, which makes it a little bit more realistic, I guess. But as you're going to see, it can lead to some things that we think is a little bit detrimental to the game that you can obviously change if you want to, but we really enjoy this scenario, so that's why I wanted to make this video. Basically, when a number rolls on an oil spring, then settlements will collect 1 oil and cities will collect 2. That's basically the idea here. So if a 10 rolls, for example, orange and red player would get an oil tile, like this. Okay? The oil tiles are kept in front of the player at any point in time, so everybody can see how many you have. And you can have a max of 4 tiles, I think, on hand. In 5 to 6 players, I think that ups it to 6. But there's a limit to how many of these you can have on your hand. Now you should use your oil as quickly as you can on your turn, because when the robber is in use, if the robber is placed on an oil spring, I believe it does block the oil production. Don't quote me on that, but I think so. But the player who rolled a 7 then, or used the knight card and moved the robber, can choose to steal an oil directly. So you don't have to pick a card from the hand. You can choose to say, I want to take one of your oil. So if you sit around with your oil, it's bound to get stolen pretty quickly. That is a nice thing. I actually enjoy that because it forces you to use your oil, and the game goes a little bit faster, and that's good. Now, on your turn, you can use oil for 3 different things. Okay, you can either choose to use it the normal conventional way, which is to trade it into the bank for 2 resources. Those 2 has to be the same resource. So you can trade it in for, say, 2 grain, or 2 wood, or 2 ore, but not 2 different ones. Okay. The second thing you can do is you can trade it in 2 oil, a grain, a brick, and an ore to buy a metropolis. This is a metropolis. And a metropolis you put under your city. You have to have a city first to buy this. So you have to use 2 oil, a grain, a grain, a brick, and an ore to build a metropolis. And a metropolis basically upgrades the city to gather 3 resources. So if a 6 rolls and you have a metropolis, green player would get 3 wood. So it basically becomes a step-up version of a city. Now, if you've played Cities and Knights, you know that there's metropolis in that scenario as well. Of course, those 2 types of metropolis have nothing to do with one another. So if you combine those 2, make sure that you keep track of what kind of metropolis you're talking about. That can be a little bit confusing. The third thing you can use an oil for, if you on your turn choose not to use oil, you cannot use any oil on your turn, you can choose to sequester one of your oil tokens, which means that you flip it over on its back, and you see this X'd out symbol here. You put that in front of you, and that oil token is now out of the game. You've removed it from the game. That's sort of the environmentalist in you telling you that this oil can pollute the land, so you should not use it. But you keep track of how many you've done this for. The drawback, of course, is that you can't use any oil that turn, and you can only sequester 1 per turn. However, for every 3 oil tokens you sequester, you get a victory point. So those can add up over the course of the game to be quite important. So these, of course, count as 1. So for every 3. Also, the first one to get to 3 gets this. This is the champion of the environment. That is also worth a victory point. But this counts as, almost like a longest road, where if somebody else gets more sequestered oil than you do, so if a different player gets to 4, then they will take this away from you. But this victory point, that you will keep forever, for every 3. So it can become a little bit of a fight to get this 1 victory point. I wish this was worth 2, but it's not. It's only worth 1. But that's how it pays off to sequester your oil. That's about it. In terms of using of oil, oil can be stolen when you use the Monopoly development card. That we didn't figure out, or we didn't realize that until after quite a few games, and the Monopoly card becomes incredibly valuable at that point. However, there is a limit to how many oil you can use. This is the disaster marker right here. And these numbers 0 through 5 in the bottom left corner keeps track of how many oil have been used. So when you start the game, this marker starts on 0. So for every oil that is used, not sequestered, but actually traded in either to build a metropolis or for resources, this tracker moves up to the next number. So if I use 2 one turn and the next player uses 2 more, it goes up to 4. Then the third player or the next turn, a player would actually only be able to use 1. because he can only go to 5. So if he used 1, then the tracker will go to 5. After that player's turn, you would have what's called the disaster phase. And in the disaster phase, the player whose turn it was would roll the dice, and whatever number he rolls, one of those numbers would be removed from the board. So for example, if the player rolled 11, then there's 2 11s here on the board. One of those 2 will be removed. So you'll have to randomly pick which one. The rules, I think, suggest that you choose this to be 1, 2, 3, and the other to be 4, 5, 6, and you roll 1 die, and that determines it. But you would actually remove this number and you would put it on the first marker here. Shows that that's been removed. So obviously that is the oil and has polluted the land so that this field will no longer produce any resources. So that'll obviously be very bad for some players and indifferent for other players. So that's a random part that could really hurt some players and skew the game in favor of some. So that's a very random element that could be detrimental to some players. When you're done with the disaster phase and the number's been removed, you reset the marker back to 0. So then the next person can use up to 5 oil then. So this is cumulative until it reaches 5. Now, once you have, in a 3 to 4 player game, you would follow this track here. So you can actually only remove 5 numbers. Once you have removed the 5th number, and the number ends up here, the game actually ends. The game finishes because you polluted the land so bad that you can't live on it anymore. And whoever has the champion of the environment actually becomes the winner at that point. The rules say that it's a less favorable way to win, but it is a winner anyway. So that's the resolution to the game in that case. If you play 5 to 6 player, then you go the longer route here. So you actually have to remove 8 on the 8th number, then the game ends, but with the same result. Now, if you are on the disaster phase and you roll a 7, obviously there's no number 7 here, then a very special thing happens. Then you have what's called coastal flooding, where, let's just say, we have a couple of coastal buildings here. All settlements on the coast disappear, like this one, and all cities on the coast gets reduced to settlements. So in this case, green player obviously would be hugely impacted by that, losing 2 points and obviously losing abilities to get resources in the future. Any metropolis, however, or city with metropolis, they are unaffected. The metropolis is too strong. Roads are also not affected if they are along the coast. So the 7 is not something that you want to roll in the disaster phase if you are on the coast. I think that's about it. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think there's anything I missed there. Maybe a couple of things. The number that rolls, if that is on an oil spring. For example, if a 9 rolls here as a result of the disaster phase, then the number for the oil spring is not removed. Instead, you will end up removing oil tokens from the supply. So you can actually run out of the supply in the end if that keeps happening. And if people sequester enough oil, then there will not be any more oil left. There's a limited amount. And there's also a limited amount of metropoli, I don't know what the plural term is, but so it's not like you have one of these each. There's a certain amount in the stock. I think it's 4 in a 3 to 4 player game. So one person can make 3 of these, and then some people might not be able to build any. So that's a cool thing, I think, as well, because it encourages players to get to build these as quickly as possible. Now I have also made oil spring tiles for mountain fields and a couple of other numbers for deserts, just to make it a little bit more variable. You don't have to do that, but I did that. But it doesn't really matter, because even though an oil spring is on a forest, there's no wood produced, so it only produces oil no matter what tile it replaces. So yeah, there's a few more rules on the special build phase and all that I'm not going to get into here. But overall, we enjoy this a lot. It actually speeds up the game. It adds 2 points that you have to get to. So in a normal game, you would need to get to 12 to win the game. But that's okay. It doesn't slow down the game just because of that. You actually go much quicker, unless you start getting rid of a lot of numbers here. That can quickly happen, especially if good numbers gets removed, then you have a problem. Overall, I would give this an 8 out of 10. I think it's good enough to get that score. I have not had a game where people have not enjoyed this, though it does change the focus a lot. Everything becomes about oil, and that you have to be prepared for. Other things are secondary, at least to oil, but that's sort of what would be expected from such a valuable resource. 2 things that we alter that I want to suggest, and you don't have to do that, of course, but we have done that with great success. One is that we actually don't end the game when you fill up the disaster track here. We continue. We think it's silly to just stop it. We want to actually reach the point total, but we usually also combine this with seafarers, where we like to play the Fog Island, where you discover new land, so then you would add more numbers to new tiles anyway. So then removing numbers wouldn't be that big of a deal, so that's the reason why we don't want to stop. And the other change we do is that if you roll a 7, in the disaster phase, we don't have all the cities and settlements being affected. We only have 1 per player. But we have the other players choose which city or settlement gets affected. So then probably their best location will get affected. So that is a change we made that we were relieved when we made it, because that losing all your settlements on the coast is just too horrible. Plus deterred people from being on the coast. And also, like I said, we like to play with seafarers, where many more settlements and cities are on the coast. So especially if you combine it with that scenario, I would change it up. So there you go. Yeah. I hope that was understandable. If you have any questions, please leave a comment and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So thank you for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.